Ladies and gentlemen, this is my nightmare. I was not ready for this book. This is amazing. I have so many tabs in this book. I have so many tabs. It is actually distorting how thick the book is. Wow. I thought I had seen bad writing. I mean, I'd seen bad writing, but this one is fascinating in how awful it is. The characters are somehow less than one-dimensional. The plot doesn't exist. There are a multitude of typos, typically not misspelled words, although there are some. A lot of them are just basic punctuation errors. There is a tab on all but 2 pages of this book. I've never seen anything like this. I'm actually at kind of a loss for words for how awful this truly is. Let's get my pillow back here. So yeah, congratulations, Onision. You're no longer the worst author I have ever read. You know, it might not look like it, but this is actually really comfortable. It's like I got the armrests just the right height. So, Empress Theresa by Norman Boutin. There's a bit of internet history to it. I'm not going to be going too much into that. If you want to check out some more information, some background on that, I'd recommend you check out the Down the Rabbit Hole episode that Fred Knudsen did. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I am sorry if I'm wrong. The short version is Norman, as I will be calling him, is incapable of any kind of constructive criticism or receiving constructive criticism. He has no idea how to compose a story or characters or pacing or anything. This book was more difficult than anything I did through the entirety of my college career. I genuinely mean that. Norman has taken the case that not only is his book a great book, it may be one of the best books of all time. While I'm certainly open to the idea of there being layers within a book that I might not enjoy, or certain contexts that I might not get the first time I read something, this doesn't even reach surface level. Like, apparently the entire book is supposed to be some homage to Joan of Arc, and that does come up at one point, and then gets immediately sidestepped. Like, I'm not sure where he was trying to go with this. He wanted to make some sort of a strong, independent main character, which, I mean, is certainly a worthy goal, but he aimed for Wonder Woman, and we got Lucy the crackhead who lives under the stairs. So because Norman won't pay attention to anything that I have to say, why would I make this review?
Because no one else will! And because it's fucking fun!
There are a lot of notes that I didn't bother taking because I wanted to get this review out before too long. My goal was to get it before Christmas. I'm filming this on December 28th. So really, there should be more tabs here, but I try to put myself on a timeline. Now, something to consider when you're reviewing any kind of medium, frankly, is the target audience. You do not judge a kid's show the same way you would judge Citizen Kane or something highbrow. And that's very important because if this were a young adult novel, it would get so much leeway. The problem, though, is Norman, on his own website, has gone out of his way to say, this is not a young adult book, which means I get to hold it to a higher standard, and I get to shit all over it. But then there's the matter of how Norman got on my radar in the first place. And it wasn't just the Down the Rabbit Hole video. Empress Theresa was always one of those titles that I was eventually going to get to. I decided to move it up on my timetable because someone challenged him. Someone linked me, or told Norman about me and linked my Twitter to him and said, this is Crimson Rogue's Twitter. He has over 10,000 subs on his YouTube channel. This was written a while ago. He reviews books by independent and unknown authors. Ask him to review your book. Prove me wrong and all the other so-called trolls wrong. Norman chose to respond thusly. I checked your link. He's just another dumb kid who doesn't know anything and will be forgotten. He's totally immersed in fourth-rate media. That's his whole life. Theresa avoids the media. She won't even talk to reporters. She achieves much. Bitch, I am sitting on a throne made of books. Your opinion means jack shit to me. Heavy is the head that wears the paper crown. They say those who are not worthy of sitting upon the paper throne get thousands of paper cuts. It also really doesn't help that Norman refers to Theresa like she's a real girl, because that sounds a little creepy. That's the kind of talk that wouldn't be out of place inside of a padded cell.
Theresa's a good girl. Theresa doesn't talk to reporters. Theresa's a good girl.
And although I do not encourage this, which is why I'm not showing any of the names of the people talking to Norman, he has a reputation of responding poorly to criticism routinely. And I don't want to encourage that. Seriously, just, he's not worth the energy, leave him alone. He has even gone out of his way to call me, personally, a troll. While I admit I do enjoy the occasional bit of teasing now and then, I don't consider what I do trolling. I'm actually here trying to educate people, at least in part, so they can improve their own writing, because sometimes holding up a bad example is a great teaching method. And oh my god, Empress Theresa is glorious for bad examples. Because it's not just that Empress Theresa has a lot of mistakes in it. It has a lot of compounded mistakes. There are things in here that are not just wrong, but are wrong in weird, complicated ways. But you'll see more of what I'm talking about in a bit. To start though, I did want to talk about the cover. Now I normally don't talk about covers, but Norman apparently made his. While one should not judge a book by its cover, both literally and figuratively, I think you can do that here. You have Theresa standing out front, blank-faced with a 1,000-yard stare, and her hair's down while she's in uniform, which is a blatant violation of uniform policy. Her fingers are weirdly long. Everything's just offset a little bit. Like, look here at the tie. That doesn't look right. And to steal a joke from other people, it looks like Norman has never seen a boob before. I'd also like to point out the men who are, I'm guessing, doing target practice behind her. They all look like they've been copied and pasted. What concerns me is that they're all doing this in rows, so there are people behind other people shooting guns towards those people. I would not feel safe on that range. Who's in charge of this? And apparently, this cover was such a masterpiece that it's repeated on the back cover. You don't get any kind of a summary, you get the front cover with a barcode. But that's not as bad as the other ones. This cover is the best of the three. That's right, this book has been revised. There are new editions out, and I've got the one that I think came out in 2016. The one just before this was a little more harmless, but Theresa still looks like a mess. Theresa still looks a little lopsided and lumpy. Her hat's askew, kind of a mess. The background looks like it was drawn in with pencils, and that's got nothing on the first cover. The first cover looks like something that I would have done for a school project when I was 6. Empress Theresa stands in the front of the cover with holding the world in her hands, get it, symbolism, with a couple of images, some of which I don't know what they're supposed to be. I mean, you've got the White House, you've got Parliament and Big Ben. Those pop up in the book, so those are obvious. There's a passenger jet, and those get used so bizarrely in the book. You'll see what I mean. And you've got this one that kind of looks like a suspension bridge, but I think that's supposed to be the mud bridge that shows up later, and trust me, that's a really weird scene. I'm not sure what this last one is. It looks like an explosion on a chain. I'm probably going to figure this out going through the book again, because a lot happens in this book. It just happens very slowly. It's, oh god, I don't even know how to describe it. So yeah, as ugly as this is the best one. Now, that being said, I can't draw for shit myself. Norman's first defense is probably going to be, oh yeah, well at least I drew my own book cover. Yeah, that one's mine. I had that done professionally because I can't draw. I can barely do stick figures, and even then, they all look like they have debilitating scoliosis. So I hire artists because they're better at it than I am. Bonus points, I don't pay them in exposure, I pay them in money. But that being said, I can still critique bad art. You see, in this way, I follow Stephen Hofstadter's viewpoint.
Because here's the thing, I've never flown a helicopter. If I saw one in a tree, I could still be like, dude fucked up. It's not supposed to be up there.
Now, something to keep in mind as we're going through this story is how plot elements are brought up. Norman randomly brings up topics and ideas that haven't been established and raises questions that don't matter or make sense. Because of this, there's very little logical consistency to the book. Theresa also has a tendency to take problems and solve them by making things much, much worse. Her solutions are some of the most creative and most idiotically dangerous things I have ever read. The ideas that this woman puts out are astonishing. The fact that no one is jumping to stop her is evidence that humanity is done. We've had a good run. We don't deserve to live anymore. But that is enough background for now. I am finally going to show you the true horror that is Empress Theresa. So immediately, Norman tries to open the book with a couple of quotes. And as I've said before, that could be a very effective way to flavor the chapter or the book that you're about to get into. The problem is, there are 3 quotes. One's from the Bible, and the other 2 quotes are from characters from within this book. So, that's what we're dealing with. I am very simple. I follow my conscience. I am what I do. If you think that's easy, try it for one day. Most people do that, and they don't even think about it. You can teach millions something more important. When the world falls apart around us, we look within ourselves and find ourselves. Show us what's within you. That is both vague and uninteresting and tells us nothing about either the character who's talking or the person he's talking to. And of course, there's the Bible quote, "What is man?
A miserable little pile of secrets.
That you are mindful of him, and a son of man, that you care for him. Yet you have made him little less than a god." But then there's the ever-important opening line. Remember, this is the hook. This is the thing that grabs onto the reader and has you wanting more. "I'm Theresa, the younger daughter of Edward and Elizabeth Sullivan, and I hope it's not bragging to say I was cute as heck at age 10.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
So while I'm not interested in this book from the hook, it's not a very good opening line, it is indicative of what we're going to get. The entire book can be summed up as Norman fawns over his original character. Do not steal. Now, while the opening line is not always going to knock it out of the park, God knows I've messed up on that every once in a while, you think you could do better than, "I was a cute kid. I was the princess in the Sullivan clan of Framingham, Massachusetts, because besides being cute, I was a whiz in school and had a good disposition. All the relatives expected great things from me." Now, many people will use a particular term to define Empress Theresa. You know what it is because you're thinking it right now. It is absolutely accurate, but I'm going to do my best not to utter it during this review as a personal challenge. But not only do we get the blandest explanation of what she looks like, we get the blandest explanation of who she is rushed out right out the gate. "I was destined for great things." Yeah, so was Anakin Skywalker. The thing is, some people actually like Anakin Skywalker. The entire first page is like this. There are so many things. The book tries to set up as Theresa is the greatest. She is the most meaningful person ever. Over and over. It hammers this point in so many times on the first page. Prime Minister Blair said I'd be remembered in a million years. Did you catch that? Churchill, Hitler, and Lincoln will be footnotes in dusty history books 1,000 years from now, and nobody remembers Charles Martel, who saved Christianity in Europe by winning the Battle of Tours 1,300 years ago to set up the world as we know it today. But Prime Minister Blair said I'd be remembered for a million years. Mr. Blair is not inclined to exaggerating. There's so much wrong with that at once. First off, you're introducing another character, and we know nothing of him, but you're already telling us that he's not inclined to exaggerating. You're rushing character at that point. You're giving us character before the character, if that makes sense. We're getting these details that don't really impact anything because we don't know who the person she's talking about is. The sentence itself has been reinforced so many times already. That's like 4 examples on a single page. Also, nobody remembers Charles Martel from the Battle of Tours. Are you talking about Charles the Hammer, who I was told about when I was a kid? And that's the other thing. There's a lot of God talk in this book. And I don't mean to say that disparagingly, because you can use religion effectively. While there's nothing inherently wrong with using religion in literature, Norman's reliance is so forced and in your face that it can only appeal to people who are already deeply entrenched in that religion. This isolates various readers, since they can't relate or possibly get insulted, like what we saw in Trigger Warning. You did not see the worst of the anti-Muslim stuff in there. Good use of religion is either used to enhance certain characters, like Patrick Bowers in Stephen James's books, or used as subtle allegory, like in C.S. Lewis's books. Stephen James wrote a series of murder mysteries, and the protagonist, technically his books are listed under Christian fiction. So they're fiction stories, but with a heavy emphasis on Christianity. And I actually kind of like those books, to an extent. He needs to get rid of the stepdaughter character, but that's a lengthy separate rant. I would say that that's religion used effectively because it's used to enhance the protagonist. He is a religious man who occasionally questions the world, God's plans for things. Oh God, why would you let these horrible murders happen? And it works. It enhances the character, gives him a little more definition. There's also C.S. Lewis, who wrote the entire Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe saga, 7 books in that, and there's a very heavy religious allegory behind everything. Aslan is an allegory for Jesus, obviously. Religion can be used effectively. It's not used effectively at all in this. Really, God doesn't even show up or anything, despite being talked about so very often and being named. Theresa refers to God as an inspiration and will try to talk directly to him, which can work if it's done correctly. But the way that it's set up, it's like, oh God, please help me with this thing I'm doing. And then she goes and she solves it herself and never goes back to thank God or even acknowledge that he may have had a hand in saving the day. It feels like filler, like Norman's just putting this worship into his book in case he needs a backup excuse when he gets to the pearly gates. Oh no, see, I deserve to get into heaven. Look at how much I praised God in that book I wrote. And then St. Peter sends him straight to hell because he also read Empress Theresa. And another thing, Churchill, Hitler, and Lincoln will be footnotes in industrial history books. So by this way, Theresa is directly comparing herself to Hitler. Not good optics. Churchill and Lincoln, fine. They were great men who did great things. Not so much with Hitler. You don't really want to associate yourself with a name like that. Go with George Washington instead. Or Thomas Edison. Or dozens of other people that you could think of right now. You're still on to the first page. Fuck! I swear I don't. The review's not going to go that long. I'm not going to go into that much detail, but this... Look at how many tabs I have! Oh my God. So, I'm sorry, this is genuinely difficult to talk about because there's so much wrong. If you ever get a chance, there are free samples of certain chapters of this book that you can look up. Try to see how much you can go through them, and then realize that I went through 465 pages. I'm getting stressed out just looking at some of the early pages again, because there's so much wrong. I had to replace a highlighter. It started out with blue, I moved to pink because I ran out of ink in my highlighter. I was making so many notes. But Theresa continues setting herself up as if she's got this great burden that she's expected to carry, even though by this point she's like 10 and has no reason to believe that her life is going to be anything but ordinary. She spends so much time talking about how super amazing awesome she is, but we never really get any establishment for it. The idea is rushed through, and nothing is given to support it. I was cute, I was amazing, I was super popular. Okay, tell me why. Give me some meat to go with the bare bones you're giving me. And it takes goddamn forever to get to any point, ever. Everybody has pressures. There are two kinds. One is threats to your life and health. I had more than my share of that with 1,000 assassins wanting to get me. This is actually a lie. While there are claims of assassins, there's like one spot where one guy attacks her and it's brushed off by like the next page. Something you'll notice is that she keeps bringing up the threat of assassins over and over and over. There's so much buildup that when something finally did happen, I was like, oh my god, it's something! And she just like gets inadvertently hit by a car, and it doesn't make sense in context. But we'll get to it. That's like 400 pages down the way. The other kind is bearing responsibility for other people's lives and welfare. That's really tough if you care about them. I set new world records in that department.
Think you're really righteous? Think you're pure in heart? Well, I know I'm a million times as humble as thou art.
People were sure I'd crack under the pressure, but I didn't. It will take smarter heads than mine to figure out why not. I don't even know what that means. Okay, so who's they in this? Theresa routinely talks about how other people judge her or think about her, and I think that's supposed to be Norman's offhanded attempt at mocking critics of his book, but it doesn't work within the setup of the world, because not only has nothing been established yet, but there's nothing to really judge. Like, who are these people, and why would they want to mess with a 10-year-old? I had to learn all I could about the world. I wondered, why should I be worrying about it in the 4th grade? I'd soon find out. So at this point, she's learning about the world to save it from a destiny that she has not been given yet. That makes no sense. Also, that is a terrible setup. I've seen better foreshadowing on the expiration date on my milk. Ah, but at least Norman knows how books work, as we see here. I'll be telling my own story, which is a good thing, because nobody knows it as well as me.
Yes, that's what
narrating a story
means.
But to really drive that point home, so that Norman wants you to know how this is going to work, so he continues that thought with this. But remember, you'll learn things in the same sequence I did. Somebody else telling my story could only say what I did in the world. They couldn't get in my head like you will. I actually read this whole book. The best book ever written! I am too sober. I am far too sober. I'd be giving Norman too much credit by calling his writing style juvenile. Not only are all of his sentences awkward as hell and his word choice extremely simple, but there are barely any commas or variation to his punctuation. It is physically draining to go through this book. Look, I'm not the fastest reader, but I am not a slow reader. It took me 2 months to get through that. 2 months and a week and a half just to get through that book. So anyway, after 2 pages of Theresa talking about how great she is, we finally get to something of a setting with Theresa at home with her 17-year-old sister Catherine, a character who was old enough to be her babysitter, and will show up only one other time in this book. Like, to the point that I honestly forgot that Theresa was not an only child. I'm pretty sure Norman did as well. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Did I say that we were getting into the story? Because we forgot this little bit. Oops. Before going on, I have to mention an odd incident that happened 6 months before I was born. Oops, I couldn't think of a way to more naturally bring this into the story. You have one paragraph between this attempted start of a plot and this oops moment. Why don't you just move something back, copy and paste to the other side of that paragraph? Is Norman writing this on a typewriter? Does he not have a delete button? This mysterious thing that happened was when her mom was raking leaves in the backyard and a fox showed up. A metal rake is a good weapon against a creature as small as a fox, and Mom held her ground. After 5 minutes, the fox walked away. This strange event seemed unimportant. My parents forgot about it for 18 years. Okay, now I can begin my story. Theresa explains that she follows God's word, and that's the only reason she's able to get through all of her problems. And this is the first of many, many, many times in which she will attribute her own accomplishments to God. She finds a problem, she says, "Oh God, help me." She solves the problem using her own abilities and skills, and later on magic powers, and somehow God's responsible for that? And at the risk of being highly offensive, this is how Norman unironically sees God.
Let's grab some knee pads, a stiff drink, and gobble his cock.
Norman's tried to claim previously that he doesn't really invoke God very often. And while it's true he doesn't utilize Deus Ex Machinas terribly often, like literal Deus Ex Machinas, he does go out of his way to praise God. And I'm not saying that in and of itself is a bad thing. It does come off as filler, though. The story sort of starts when Theresa was playing in her backyard, and do you remember that fox that was so unceremoniously dropped a page ago? Well, it came back when Theresa, it came back 10 years later when Theresa's 10, she's playing in her backyard, and it stops and stares at her, and then this happens. In an instant, faster than you could blink an eye, a softball-sized white ball emerged from the fox and went straight into my stomach. You see, one of the things you do when you critique books is you look for a lot of subtext. You eventually learn the many ways that certain messages and images can be presented through subtle use of language and double meaning. We just saw a fox approach a 10-year-old girl, and all of a sudden there is this white stuff that got shot at her stomach. Now, I'm not saying that Norman intended to write the image that you are currently making fun of him for, but it is there. Welcome to the internet, Norman. We're all fucking weird here. Also, despite the softball-sized white ball moving faster than the blink of an eye, Theresa was still able to perceive it, so figure that out. Well, the fox runs off, and Theresa just goes back to her day thinking, well, maybe it was a weird daydream because I'm hungry, until fire engines show up. You see, what had happened is apparently there was a heat spike all of a sudden, and they're getting temperatures of 115 degrees in some areas and 70 in others. So while it's true that the fire department does do more than just put out fires and rescue cats from trees, do they really investigate random heat spikes? I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just curious what that phone call was like. Yeah, it's really warm all of a sudden.
Stop calling us.
But not only did the fire department showed up, 2 days later, a very obvious surveillance car showed up. Theresa thinks that maybe they came to investigate her because that fox orb thing happened. So, in order to deduce what's going on, did she talk to her parents, or call the police, or approach the car in order to talk to the possible surveillance team? She did none of those. Her solution makes no goddamn sense. She dials 0 on her phone and talks to the operator. I am serious. She gets the number for Alice Pizza, then she hangs up and somehow determines this means the surveillance team was not listening to her. I have no words. But she's convinced that she is being watched. So the next day, she calls the operator again, and this time, there's a delay. So they are watching her. What is logical consistency?
That's not how it works.
I don't get how that's supposed... That's how it's introduced in the book. There's no setup. There's no explanation of, oh, well, it's an old secret from the Cold War that it turns out if your phones are ever tapped, just call the operator to verify. It's nothing. It's like this is supposed to be common knowledge. Call the operator, and if you get a response, if they do their job, you're not being watched. But if they don't do their job, they are watching you. I don't get it. The writing style in this book is astounding because while it rushes to get through the story as quickly as possible, it also includes several unnecessary details like this line here that I'm about to read. 2 days later, my mom took me to a nearby strip mall. There was a DVD movie rental store. I looked around for the classic movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. They'd shown it on television 2 months earlier. That last line adds nothing. I mean, what does that do to flavor the universe, or build character, or advance the plot? Nothing. You have to trim the fat. If a sentence does not serve the story in any way, get rid of it. What does this add? How does this help shape the world? By reaffirming that reruns are a thing? No wonder this book is so goddamn long. It is very important that you understand that television reruns are a thing. But the key about that is the mention of the computer HAL. HAL from 2001 is this creepy robotic machine that really freaks Theresa out when she was a kid. But while that freaks her out, the people watching her and this do not freak her out. She's out shopping with her mom at the grocery store and a woman approaches her, asks, "Do you have a cell phone?" "Yeah." "Call me when you're alone." She handed me a piece of paper with a phone number. Is stranger danger not a thing now? You do not just go and randomly talk to children and hand them your phone number. Call the police! The woman turns out to be Jan Struthers from the United States government.
Kent Mansley, work for the government.
She's been tracking Theresa for the whole summer, and she's been the one in charge of all of the watchers following her around. And she establishes something, which I had actually forgotten about this, but this conflicts with something later on in the book. They've been tracking this weird anomaly. Something from outer space came to Earth 7 years ago. 7 years. Keep that in mind. Now this already conflicts with stuff from the book, because the Fox thing, as we learn later on, had been the host for that white orb thing. That's what's really at the center of all this. But we've already established that the Fox thing visited Theresa's mother 10 years ago. So what fell 7 years ago? This is never answered. Now, while they had been following Theresa for a little while, apparently one big mark of suspicion came when Theresa rented 2001: A Space Odyssey. Apparently, Theresa was giving off the heat that they detected earlier on. It's not explained or even utilized later on at all. Like, outside of this one chapter, if you forget about it, it won't affect the story at all. Norman just needed a way for the government to get invested in Theresa so they could make contact. So he came up with this stupid way of, Theresa just lets out a lot of heat. They never use it. When you're writing your story like that, when you're setting up the universe, everything has to remain consistent, and you have to properly follow through with it. If you don't, and you set up things like that, where you've just got this random heat spike, it looks like you don't understand your own ideas, your own rules. If the author doesn't understand the rules, how can the reader be expected to? If you set up these things artificially just to advance a singular plot point, and it doesn't show up or evolve in any way within the story, it's not going to work. The structure of the novel is going to collapse, and that's what happens multiple times. If this book were meant to be a skyscraper, you wouldn't have a tower reaching into the heavens. You'd have a messy, distorted pile of rebar and unmixed cement. The other thing that I really don't like about this book is just the way that the dialogue goes on. You get pages upon pages of prose, and you want to break that up every once in a while. Pages and pages of prose are inevitable. They're going to happen, fine. But when you can, if you can break them up with dialogue, you add more variety to the pages, you add more variety to your sentence structure, it just looks better. It's, on a very basic level, it is more visually appealing. Norman decides to do large chunks of prose or large chunks of dialogue. And the dialogue, it goes back and forth. There's no there's no action between so much of this. There is nothing to break up the dialogue once it gets going, to the point where it kind of gets confusing who's talking. Like, you've got to pay attention, because you can't tell who the characters are based on what they're saying. A well-written novel, the characters will be so distinct that you can throw dialogue up there and you'll already know who's talking, because they have a unique style of speaking, or they've got an accent, or they've got a lisp, or they use certain words, or something like that. Don't get that in here. It also really doesn't help that all of the dialogue here is information that the reader already knows about. How long after the white ball jumped at you did the fire trucks come? Half an hour. Did the white thing change you in any way? No. Does it make sounds or talk to you? No. Have you seen it again? No. It's like it went away. How much have you been eating lately? Like I always do.
Oh my god, I am so bored! Ah!
Not that Norman would be able to tell. He actually, in his book, says that this is amazing. This was the most important interview since Moses came down the mountain. This Q&A is nothing but a rapid back and forth exchange of shallow answers and close-ended questions. Joaquin Phoenix's interview with David Letterman was more important than this one.
And Joaquin, I'm sorry you couldn't be here tonight.
But apparently, watching 2001: A Space Odyssey was a vital indicator that Theresa was aware of this thing. All right, she dropped that line immediately. You rented 2001: A Space Odyssey. What did it show you? It showed me don't talk to this thing. It's like talking to the devil. I haven't seen A Space Odyssey in a while, but I have no idea how you can reasonably draw that conclusion. Because while she does end up calling the device goo ball thing inside of her Hal, there's no real link between her Hal and computer Hal.
I didn't hear that. Please try that again.
Son of a bitch. The government's listening. So Jan Struthers explains that Theresa's going to be getting a security detail of sorts. Mostly they're going to be watching and observing her and noting anything out of the ordinary. But they set it up in the worst way. By this point, Theresa officially names the white orb inside of her Hal, and she asks what would happen if one of the people watching her talks. Like, what if they reveal this super top secret information about Hal, or Hal living inside of Theresa, or anything like that. And Jan says this to calm her down. Most of our people don't know why they're watching you. Only the people at the top know. I'm one of the few people who knows you give off heat. Without knowing that, nobody can prove you have anything to do with Hal. Jesus, use a comma. So the people who are following Theresa, the people who have to monitor her and report anything unusual, don't know what they're looking for. They don't even know why they're following Theresa. They suddenly got orders, follow this 10-year-old girl. And apparently nobody questioned it. How would they react if something goes wrong? What would they know to look for? What behaviors would be considered aberrant or not? There's no environmental baseline for them to start from, so you're just paying a bunch of guys in suits to stare at a little girl from afar. The subtext here is mortifying, and what's worse is how easy this is to write away. Just say that the Watchers are all sworn to secrecy. That, or don't bring up the question at all. Cause it's a dumb question. If they don't know what to report on or anything about Theresa, then how can they know it's something unusual? This is incredibly destructive to the investigation. I don't know how anyone can receive these orders and not demand an explanation. You see, that's what I'm talking about when I say that there are mistakes in this book that are compounded. They're wrong in like layered ways. Because this was an attempt to fix the whole what if one of them talks problem, even though that's not really a problem in the first place. It's just an arbitrary factoid that Norman thought of while he was writing this, even though it really doesn't matter. If you didn't even address that question, it would not be a problem. Readers would just assume that they all took oaths or signed NDAs or something. And this is a great display of the separation between the narrator and the reader. There's no reliable connection here for the reader to really relate to or grasp or anything. There's such a severe disconnect because the narrator, Theresa, is asking questions that the reader probably wouldn't think of. She asks what would happen if she wanted to tell other people outside of Jan this secret about Hal. And Jan says, but remember, if you can't keep it a secret, why would your parents? Your mother will want to share it with your Aunt Jessica, and Aunt Jessica will want to share it with Uncle John. And after that, you'd get thousands of reporters showing up to bother you, even though there's no proof of any of this, and it sounds crazy. All the more so, it's anticipating something that hasn't happened yet that interests people. But there has to be some sort of a baseline of truth for you to really understand this first. You can't just say this little girl has a magical alien snowball living inside her and expect people to buy that. Especially if it doesn't manifest itself in any real way outside of making the area around her a little warm. Again, something that does not exist outside of this one chapter. It also doesn't help that Jan works for the Defense Intelligence Agency, a real agency if you're not familiar with them. For some reason, and I don't know why they would set it up like this, but for some reason, the DIA hired all of the watchers from outside of their agency to watch Theresa. They know nothing.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Now, the DIA is not the largest or most prominent agency in the federal government in the United States, but why would they give something of this matter of importance, this apparent display of possible extraterrestrial life, why would they hand that job of monitoring the alien out to contractors? It seems like an unnecessary risk. But Theresa really displays her intellect at the end of the scene when Jan says goodbye and just says, hey, call us if you ever need anything. In a moment, I realized Jan Struthers hadn't asked me if I'd told anyone besides my parents the secret. They knew I hadn't. How did they know that? Wow, it's almost like they've been spying on you for months! You know, one of the scary things that I heard about this before I went into it was a review that said something akin to, what happens when you take a 400-plus page first draft manuscript and presented it as a completed result? You get Empress Theresa. I personally disagree with that assessment. This feels like multiple first drafts from multiple different books that got smashed together and have nothing to really do with each other. And that was submitted as a complete manuscript. So the next scene, it just says, one day she wakes up and she notices an orange spot in the middle of her field of view. I'm going to cut it short. It's an aimbot. Theresa gets magical aiming powers. Yeah, it's as lame as it sounds. It's basically a little targeting reticle that just kind of sits there. I guess it's there for the rest of her life, and the way that she explains the way Hal works later on, it doesn't make any sense how this would develop. I've got a whole thing on that later on. Just keep this in mind. She gets an aimbot.
Hacks!
The thing that really sucks is she doesn't even do anything with it. She spends all this time, like half a page, setting it up and exploring it, and it never gets used in any meaningful way for the rest of the book. I brought up the 3-inch wide flat rock and threw it at a gallon water sprinkler can 10 feet away. The rock hit the can dead center. I hadn't even tried to do that. I found another rock and threw it at the can. It too hit the can. Little girl throws rock at can, news at 11. And this is one of the many problems with Theresa as a protagonist. She has no imagination. And get used to me saying that because I will say it multiple times. So that's what the orange dot was for. It was an aiming device. It got the rocks to whatever I was looking at. Interesting, but I couldn't see any use for it. You know, I bet she'd have an amazing bank shot with a grenade. She actually does eventually find a use for it when she goes to play catch with one of the neighbor kids. And that's pretty much the extent that she uses that for, ever. She uses it to help her with pitching.
Needle, needle, needle.
And because of that, she becomes the star pitcher in high school. But that's not the only power that she gets. She also gets super strength. And that one she does use in very limited capacity, but again, we'll get to it later. The way she discovers it though, there was a new bottle of steak sauce. I tried to open it, but it was tight. The trouble with these steak bottles was that the cap was so narrow. There was no leverage to twist it. I tried harder. No wonder little old ladies starved to death. Old ladies starve to death because they cannot open their bottle of A1 steak sauce.
Sonic, I can't open this can of hash!
What's weird though is that her powers seem to come from Hal receiving kind of like a nudge, like, hey, can you help me out with this? She was struggling to open up the bottle, and Hal apparently noticed that and gave her super strength to help her open the bottle. And so it shatters. Well, in order to test this, she grabs some horseshoes and tries twisting them, which works. At first it didn't change, but as I applied more force, Hal seemed to get the idea. The horseshoe bent easily. This is like gaining superpowers via Lamarckian evolution. Well, these powers are strange, so she needs someone to talk to. Rather than go to her parents though, she, being a good Christian girl, goes to talk to the priest at her local church. But she can't just go to the priest and say, bless me, Father, for I have super strength. She actually had to provide proof, so she ran and grabbed a bag to store the horseshoes in to take to the church. But not just any bag. On the way through the living room, I picked up a burlap shopping bag used by environmentally conscious people who didn't want paper or plastic. You hear that, everyone? Teresa's better than you. Yeah, so apparently priests are supposed to be beyond salvation if they reveal any kind of a secret, so she's telling the priest, Father Donati. Father Donati. And she proves that she has super strength by taking out the horseshoes and bending them in front of him. And Father Donati becomes her only confidant. Now, Father Donati is very impressed by this display, but rather than think demonic possession or anything like that, he just accepts that there was some weird alien goo monster inside of Teresa now, because that's a much more reasonable assumption. And this gets confirmed when Jan Struthers, who was apparently in the parking lot, comes up to talk to Father Donati. Now, when you're writing dialogue, something to keep in mind is repeating information. If you repeat something that the reader already knows, you're wasting their time. Norman does this religiously. In multiple ways, actually. It's honestly kind of impressive how bad it is. One thing that happens on numerous occasions is Teresa will think to herself, hey, this is really dumb. And then she'll voice that through dialogue and say, hey everyone, this is really dumb. Like, you just established that. Why are you saying it again? And there's also the matter of bringing up points that have already been established through previous scenes. When you're doing that, the better thing to do is to, let's say you had a couple of characters, one had this adventure through the woods that the reader got to live through. Bob, we'll call him. Well, Bob wants to go and tell all of his friends, so rather than Bob give me 2 pages of dialogue repeating everything that we've already read, he could just say, Bob told his friends about his adventures in the woods. That's the kind of thing that you want to do, because at that point, you are pointing out that Bob communicated what happened to him to a certain group of friends, but you're not repeating everything to the point where we lose interest. Everything has already been established, and we don't need it repeated. But Norman never learned that. These men don't know everything, only I do. What did Teresa say? I'm not at liberty to say. It's not the usual stuff? It isn't. It's critical to you tell no one. Teresa will be the first to suffer. People will come after her. They'll kidnap her, kill her, or worse. Who are you? I work for the American government. How many of you are there? Hundreds. That's a lot of people. Do you begin to understand how important this is? I'm beginning to.
Shut up! Oh my god, I don't care!
Oh, I forgot to mention, because by this point, it's been 7 years since the orb bonded with Teresa, and she's 17 now. So because Father Donati believes Teresa, and this whole Hal thing gets confirmed with his meeting with Jan, he arranges a meeting with the Cardinal. He doesn't get a name, he's just the Cardinal. And he doesn't really exist outside of this one paragraph. A meeting was arranged with the Cardinal. It was concluded that there was no diabolical possession. I was a perfectly normal, good girl. My story, confirmed by the brief visit of Jan Struthers, had to be true no matter how amazing it was. I find it amazing that we got all of that dialogue repeating information that we had already had established that we did not need. And the Cardinal, who will be important as a plot element later on when Theresa goes to college, not only does not get a name, but doesn't really get any stage presence. The information that Norman chooses to dish out, his choices are so bizarre. He overfeeds us redundant information and deprives us of vital information. So I can barely follow along with what's going on while I read the same scene over and over and over. It is maddening. I forgot to mention this earlier. She gets to skip a year in school, and the reason why is confusing. I did so well in the 5th grade that it was decided I'd skip the 6th and go straight into the 7th. I would graduate from high school at 17. Part of the decision to let me skip a year was my hair. It started growing very thick after Hal came around. I mean, you could grab a handful of my hair and feel the weight like it was wet. Mom was sure this was a sign of my change of life and I needed to be with girls my own emotional age. So many times this book leaves me speechless at how dumb it is. Hair is a lousy indicator of emotional age. Take it from someone with hair like this. Because she had a good barber, she got to skip a grade. That is a very weird flex. I don't even know why Hal would have that kind of an effect on her. I mean, did the fox that Hal came out of have particularly luscious fur? Apparently Jan Struthers also bumps into Theresa every now and then to check up on her. And Theresa, at one point, asks how many people are watching her. 400, she said. It takes that many people to watch someone 24 hours a day without being noticed. I guarantee if you had 400 people watching a single person, oh my god, they would notice. I mean, in the Jason Bourne movies, they had, like, maybe a dozen or 24 people watching him, and he had a confirmed kill count. And anyway, that is the end of chapter 1. Yes, everything that I just went over takes place in the first 25 pages of this book. Do you understand why the pacing is a nightmare? All of that information got shoved in here with no time to develop or grow or sprout up naturally. It is such a rushed mess. So much information, no time to flesh out. The whole book is like this. Every chapter is like that. Some chapters do focus more on individual plot lines, but because of the structure of the overall novel, nothing stays in place for long. So the next chapter starts off all about how Theresa's an amazing baseball player. Apparently, she was able to get on the high school boys baseball team in her freshman year. No doubt her strength combined with her Aimbot vision made that for a rather easy task. And I guess that was enough to get her on TV, because all of a sudden, she's on TV. I was on television all the time. Now I learned something about the world. People said bad things about me on the internet. To use an appropriate baseball term, wow, that came out of left field. It's a complete jump in subject. She's talking about how awesome she is at baseball, then all of a sudden, hey, internet trolls are a thing. Apparently this is a section that was revised in later editions as part of Norman's response to the trolling he got for his terrible, terrible book. Because it is brought up so unnaturally, and there's no real explanation given. It's just, they're saying mean things about her. Because it's so out of nowhere that it could only serve as Norman complaining about trolls. It doesn't serve the story. It is the author's personal vendetta against criticism. It's weighing the story down because, you know, like the first 3 pages pretty much just get summed up with this complaint about trolls. Why are they going after her? Are these just assholes at her school? The way this is written, and the fact that Theresa has been on TV, makes this seem like some widespread attack. What has Theresa done to warrant any kind of attention like this? Especially because this contradicts what she was saying earlier about the baseball, because she says, so being a pitcher on a boys' baseball team wouldn't be such a big deal, you'd think, and it wasn't. I made the boys' team in my freshman year. And then that jumps into the paragraph about her being on TV all the time. So, is it a big deal or not? Why is she on TV at all? No explanation is actually given for that. I'm assuming it's because of the baseball. It's the only thing that really fits within the context of the story, but it's not confirmed. So that's pure speculation on my part. Norman tries to fit the complaints, the trolling, in with the context of the story, of what Theresa would have to put up with, possibly. And Norman doesn't really know what he's talking about. Even worse were the websites that a few people started about me. They questioned my sexual orientation, or said I must have gone to bed with a coach to get on the team. They said I was making out with everybody on the team. There was nothing I could do about these people. So, Theresa being on the baseball team is not a big deal, but it still warrants people creating multiple websites just to mock her. I don't get it. So, Theresa goes to the principal to try to complain, and the principal goes beyond trying to console Theresa. The only way I can really sum this up is the principal starts sucking Theresa's dick. You are beautiful, intelligent, and you're often on television. You're a sports star. You have straight A's and high morals. All these things represent what people want in kids. You're the daughter every parent wants. You're the student every teacher wants. The young person society wants. You fulfill all the authority's expectations. Look, there's trying to restore self-esteem, and then there's raising the kid on a pedestal so ridiculously high, you'd think that she was like the second coming. Oh my god, okay. I love this part. So this is gonna be a bit lengthy, but I love how stupid this is. So, the principal tries to comfort Theresa by relating an old commercial she saw a while back. It makes no sense. There was a TV commercial years ago I never forgot. A young woman has 3 horses and bought a 4th, a miniature horse only 2 feet high. She put the little horse in the corral with the 3 normal-sized horses. They sniffed the little horse and ran away from him. The little horse had very short legs and couldn't run. He walked towards the big horses, who kept running away. He followed them everywhere, but couldn't get within 50 feet of them. Finally, the little horse gave up and stared at the big horses and towards the house where the young woman watched out of her window. It was very sad. The little horse didn't understand why he was being rejected. Then the woman ordered something online. That was what the commercial was about. She ordered a dog door for the front of her house. Now the little horse could come into the house and be with the woman anytime he wanted. Who the hell is selling dog doors for miniature horses? Look, I get what you're going for, but a Budweiser commercial this is not. It's supposed to be this intimate moment of looking after the poor little horse. And sure, that's sad, but it's a commercial for a dog door for horses. Who would sell that? It's so dumb! You seriously couldn't think of anything better than that! Oh my god, I love that! So the moral of the story is the little horse ended up better than the other horses. And Theresa takes this as such a revelation that it completely changes her worldview. I saw why the trolls were angry. They knew they couldn't go where I was going. I'd have a good life. They wouldn't. What they said made no sense. They were really mixed up big time. I blame the parents for not raising them right. Now, this is me just being incredibly petty, but I'm assuming Norman's gonna want to use that same argument against me, because, you know, he thinks I'm trolling. And I'm not going anywhere in life, so let me just put that right there. There we go. Going nowhere in life. So that entire subject got resolved. So now Theresa is just talking about her mom. An unexamined life is not worth living. Know thyself. Mom said too many people never question who they are and how they're doing. This is a fast track to disaster. This book in a nutshell. Nothing else happened to me in high school besides the social media bozo's hatred, making this entire chapter a complete waste. So the book just brings up and drops plots between paragraphs. Like, I'm skipping a couple of things here. Eventually, Theresa sits down in a Burger King to meet with Jan Struthers. Burger King, where the noise gave privacy as good as the Sahara Desert to update each other's thoughts and info about how. People with security clearances actually have to be really careful about what they discuss and where. You can't really talk about sensitive subjects out in the open. I know that you see that happen all the time in movies. It's like clandestine spy work, but it's not how it actually works in real life. Norma's just picking up all of these plot points from movie cliches. So apparently, they just go back and they reinforce where Hal came from. Apparently he was a 100-foot wide white ball that headed to Framingham, Massachusetts. And nobody saw it. Now this is contradicted later on, but that's much later in the book. Just, again, remember that and the 7 years thing. So in response to this mysterious white ball, the president, President Sheffield, organized a secret office in the Pentagon, the Office of Orbital Phenomena Surveillance, or OOPS for short. Which will be great when someone has to explain where all the money in their budget went. Hey, who spent $50 million on coffee filters? Oops! Theresa's a little perturbed by all this, though, because she hasn't heard anything from Hal. I mean, aside from the super strength and the aimbotting. So she hasn't been in any kind of communication. And she wonders what reason he may have come to Earth for. It was a safe bet he didn't travel a million light years just to watch me take showers. Ew? Why did you include that? That's weird. We also get an addition. It's not just that the area heats up around Theresa, even though I don't think that's happening anymore, because no one else really complains about it. It's like, why do we hang out with this Theresa chick? It's like the temperature goes up 40 degrees whenever she's near. Human space heater or something. But no, apparently they notice a column of disturbed air directly above Theresa that reaches out to space, that they detect via Doppler radar. Now, it's not picked up normally by weather stations because Doppler radars, they scan horizontally, but they can see it with a radar beam aimed straight down, so I guess they're using the Doppler radar vertically. So they go back and forth a little bit more about Hal, where he came from, what he might want, what this might mean for Theresa, and Theresa's worried about it, so Jan tells her not to worry about it. You may have to act quickly. You might need the knowledge of Thomas Jefferson and the wisdom of Abraham Lincoln.
The strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas.
And in the next section, Jan is missing. Theresa attempts to reach out to Jan using the email that was provided. The email is janswatchers@snoop.gov. See, this is why it took me so long to get through this book. I had to take frequent breaks. I have to take frequent breaks in between this review. I've already stopped the camera like 5 times. Jan's missing. Jan's confirmed missing. And Theresa's only point of contact is some guy named Jeremy Benton, a character who is so insignificant, I forgot that he was a character until about 5 seconds ago. So the problem is there's a bit of suspicion in the United States federal government, going as far as the White House, worrying about what Theresa and Hal really are. So Jan went to the Canadian Prime Minister. Now, considering the sensitive nature of everything that's going on with Theresa and Hal, and considering the clearances and information that Jan had exclusive access to, this is possibly treason. The book uses this as a branch out to Prime Minister Blair of Britain. I don't know why they didn't just go directly to him, why they had to go through Canada first, but Canada's closer, I guess. But anyway, Jan, the government point of contact that Theresa had been relying on for the past 20 pages or so, is pretty much out of the story. She does come back later, but it doesn't matter, so you might as well forget who she is now. The big problem is that the newly sworn in President William Martin doesn't like Theresa or Hal, and is really worried that they may be some sort of a security risk, something about aliens possibly invading or something. This is where the book really breaks things down into details we don't need to know about, to the point where I genuinely don't care, and it just keeps talking. It's like the chatty friend at a party who doesn't notice you're nodding off while they're talking. So the whole chapter ends with Theresa wondering about Hal and why the president might not trust her or like her. If Hal wanted me to do something good, I was ready. If something bad, I wouldn't do it. Yeah, except we haven't really seen anything from Hal, so we don't know if he's able to mind control her, or manipulate her, or bait her into certain circumstances, or get her to perceive things differently, or get her to hallucinate so she attacks somebody innocent. We know very little about what Hal is by this point, so this statement from Theresa comes up as extremely superficial. How much control does she actually have? We don't know for a solid fact. The fact that Hal doesn't seem to have any kind of a personality, a statement which is confirmed later on, doesn't really assist us. So she looks extremely naive when she's talking about, oh, well, I'll just do good and not bad. And keep in mind, of course, we've seen pretty much nothing of Theresa's moral compass. She's obviously willing to use these powers for personal gain. Notice she's on the baseball team, which got her on TV. So if she wants us to believe that she won't use these powers ever for personal gain, I don't buy it. Anyway, next chapter. So Theresa gets a full scholarship into Boston College, which is a real, a private Jesuit research university. I looked that up. Apparently, Father Donati and the Cardinal were involved in getting her in for the full scholarship. While she's in college, keep in mind she's 17 at this point, she meets a couple of people while she's in the cafeteria. She meets a guy who's looking at her intensely. She called him Mr. Intense. And there was another guy who came up to say hi. His name is Mr. Fast Move. There's something to be said about naming characters based on certain arbitrary factoids about themselves. You can do that, absolutely. Joe Abercrombie does this a lot in his books. Random side characters who get, ooh. I gotta read this book. You can name a side character something like Big Nose or Small Feet or whatever. But it helps if you have a scant amount of creativity to go along with it. Especially because he goes and immediately just gives his name. It's some guy named Jack. Yeah, Jack Coster. Oh, but let's not forget Mr. Intense. He is a guy named Steve Hartley. And if you're familiar with this book, you know where that's going. But despite deciding to go out with Mr. Fast Move, Theresa still gives a paragraph-long description of who Mr. Intense is, as well as an adjoining chapter explaining who Jack is. The problem is that Mr. Intense, Steve, kind of comes off as really quiet and unassuming, maybe a little creepy, because apparently he was staring pretty intently from across the cafeteria. Oh my god, the setup in this book is exhausting. But enough about establishing side characters. The plot demands that we find out about these two random guys following Theresa. It turns out that they're watchers, but the campus police pick them up and take them in, and the watchers refuse to answer any questions until Theresa gets there. Things happen so quickly and with no build-up, so it is actually exhausting to read. People talk about how smoothly a book's pacing might come across. You can have fast pacing, you can have slow pacing, it can work. What really matters is how consistent and how smooth the pacing comes across. This book jumps around different plot points and characters so quickly, so sporadically, that I am mentally exhausted just doing a recap. Like, I'm being honest, I'm actually getting really tired because this takes so much. It takes so much to relive this fucking book. I'm not even 50 pages in. The Watchers get captured by campus security. Theresa follows them in. My note here is, one of the officers asks, "Can you come to our office?" "I don't know where that is. I'll follow you." Theresa sounds like a very polite robot. So apparently these two guys have been seen on campus frequently following Theresa. She knew about them. She knew the Watchers were following her around. But there was a team of 400 people in this, and they kept sending the same guys around to follow Theresa. These guys were not prepared with any kind of a cover story. They didn't have anything to answer with when campus security pulled them into an office. They didn't have any badges to show because they're just contractors. It's laughable at how little planning there is here. They should be rotating in shifts with someone just sitting there nonchalantly reading a newspaper on every corner. This is why editing is so important. You've got to go back and make sure that your story points make sense. There's a team of 400 people, and there's no plan to get anyone out of trouble if something like this happens. And Theresa goes overboard with worrying about this. It's gone too far. They'll go to the FBI and the newspaper. Call your boss. These guys are not real police. They do not have arresting authority. I doubt that they have FBI contacts. I doubt they'd go to the newspaper because that looks bad. The most they have on these two watchers is a stalking charge. So going to the newspaper would be telling everybody, don't come to Boston College. We allow stalkers here. Very bad optics. Maybe you'd go to the police. But the most they have on these two is stalking. So, and according to every young adult book that I've read, that's romantic. So they just get a slap on the wrist and get told not to do it again. But that whole thing gets resolved because the Watchers call their director, and the director calls the President of the United States. The President of the United States himself directly talks to the campus security and says, leave these guys alone. The senior officer, in fact, says this: we will say nothing about this to anybody, not to each other, not to our wives, not to our dogs. This situation does not exist, nor will it ever exist. That's all. You see, the real problem with that now is that these guys don't have security clearances, so they haven't actually signed any NDAs. They are not obligated to keep this secret. By giving them such an order, you are guaranteeing that someone is going to go to their wife and say, hey honey, guess what? These characters cannot exist in any kind of a real setting because they would absolutely blab to everyone who would listen because the President of the United States, something is going on. They don't know what it is, but they've got agents from the federal government following a student on their campus, and the situation is so severe, the President of the United States called them directly to say, leave this alone. Shit is going down. They don't know what. That's weird. That's interesting. That's a little scary for some. They're gonna blab. These characters don't act like people. That's one of my biggest problems about this. They don't act in any way that I can accept as realistic. So it's impossible to get into the story, to get absorbed in the story, because nothing works. God. The next scene is October, homecoming week. And Theresa, of course, is leaning on Jack to ask her out. But apparently, Jack's current girlfriend from back home came to visit. So yeah, Jack's a two-timing jackass. And rather than confront Jack directly and demand some kind of an explanation from him, Theresa decides to go back to her dorm and sulk for a little bit. In fact, she actually puts on a little black nothing flimsy dress. It's described as a backless dress made of flimsy, clingy material, which apparently was cut 6 inches above the knee. So, you know, real sexy outfit. And she just waits for Jack to come by and explain himself, which doesn't happen. Instead, Theresa sits around and watches The Kane Mutiny, a movie she had seen before. Captain Queeg was a paranoid personality who couldn't take adversity. The author in a nutshell. She then jumps between other stories and movies and books, which do not matter. They do not come back in any way. So there's this big explanation for what's going on with the Kane Mutiny. Apparently it was adapted from something, so Norman is now stepping on my territory. And she just contemplates how sad she is because everyone's off in these parties and she's not. She's just sulking in her dorm. People who never went to college believed it was one continuous party. In fact, parties were rare. So I actually just did a cursory search on Boston College's student class size. They just accepted, according to this article I'm reading, they just accepted 8,400 students out of 31,000 applicants. Now, I went to a small private university. Boston College is a much bigger campus. We still had parties every single week. Boston College just sounds incredibly boring. We get a 2-page summary of the Kane Mutiny, which does not come back at all. I honestly don't know why it's in here. Theresa just sits around in her room, nothing happens until Steve shows up. College life was mostly studying and killing time with inane activities. It was a test. If you could stand this life for 4 years, you could stand anything. A lot of kids went nuts and dropped out. Ah, yes, the freshman with 1 month's experience in college has figured everything out. Sad story, if you think that college is as hard as it gets, I've got really bad news for you. So because Jack is being a jerk, Steve makes a move and he and Theresa become an item. And they end up watching this show on the BBC called Victoria. It's about Queen Victoria and all the adversity that she put up with. I don't know, I haven't seen it myself, so I don't know how well it's being represented here. It almost sounds like inspiration for the book, except the show apparently came out in 2016, which is after this book was initially published. But yes, Theresa falls in love with Steve. Steve's her first love. He also felt he had found the right mate and didn't want to mess things up.
I just want a mate.
You just want to mate.
So we get a little bit more about Steve. The only thing that really matters is that he wants to be a physicist. That's the only thing that really has any play later on in the story, aside from how perfectly matched he is with Theresa. See, she's incredibly boring, and he's incredibly boring. They're perfect for each other. Nearly page-long discussion about how their situation was like the situation between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. I don't know why this is here. We get some background on Hamilton and Jefferson, which doesn't do anything. It's used to try to compare between how Theresa and Steve had different childhoods. It's just another chunk of meaningless tangents that Norman just throws in there because I think he's trying to show off. But Steve was such a complex romantic gentleman. I think this one can be filed under men writing women. Oh, but Theresa's not like those girls. You see, she just wants the nice married life, white picket fence, couple of kids, couple of dogs or cats or something. And Steve is just the man to give it to her. He wanted a lifetime commitment, as I did. Despite almost universal skepticism, there really are gentlemen like Steve in the world, and every girl wants to be a lady who catches one. So I guess lesbians aren't real. But what really alarms me about this little love connection is it's not how bland it is or how predictable it is or cliche. It's how fast it's moving. Because they're both still freshmen. In a month, we knew we'd get married and we wanted it soon. Well, really, now. I don't know how to read that. Could we go 4 years without doing it?
Needle, needle, needle.
The fact that you have two awkward, nervous college students, freshmen, who decided after a month, I suppose that's what this is supposed to be, but after a month they wanted to get married to the first person they ever fell in love with. And you know what? You flip the page, they're getting married. I expect them to get divorced in about a month. No, that would be too realistic. The wedding, though, is so bizarre because it's the moment that Theresa wanted. It's the dream of every girl to marry a perfect gentleman like Steve. And the wedding is going to be this big, momentous occasion, this tremendous event in her life. And I am not exaggerating when I say that Norman spends more time describing her dress than he does the wedding. Depending upon how you want to look at it is kind of mortifying. Norman tries to set this up as Theresa's being this, good Catholic girl who never does anything wrong, and he talks about her body a lot. I don't mean to make it sound like he's fantasizing or anything. I've got to keep this family friendly for YouTube, but I've also got to swear so I don't lose any money to COPPA. I don't mean to make it sound like Norman's jerking it between chapters, but it's really weird when you get sentences like this. I was gorgeous as a recently turned 18-year-old. Oh boy, she's barely legal! And her dress is described as, for the church service I wore a 2-piece wedding gown. A floor-length wide skirt with spaghetti shoulder straps was made from matte Duchess satin. Over this I had a jacket made of peekaboo cotton lace that more or less covered my shoulders. and the top half of my upper arms so as not to scandalize the congregation. At the reception, the jacket and train came off, and my shoulders and cleavage charmed the crowd. Her cleavage charmed the crowd. Norman, dude, come on, man. That's a little... She's barely 18. Anyway, so we get that whole description, and the wedding kind of happened in between sentences there, because we've got this ending here where she says at the reception, he was so busy describing the dress that we got nothing for the actual wedding itself. They move into a small apartment for privacy, and they get a new Chevy as a wedding present.
Based on a recent nationwide survey, Chevy is more reliable than Toyota, Honda, and Ford.
You guys didn't survey any mechanics, huh?
I was driving the car alone one Saturday to go grocery shopping, thinking of the wonderful future waiting for me. And that's the end of that chapter with that marvelous cliffhanger. Chapter 4. This one. Okay, this is the big one. It's been boring up to this point. It's been slow, monotonous. There have been no character moments. This is where shit really gets ridiculous. This is the one with the soda. Some of you just got really happy about that. So Theresa starts off the chapter by immediately getting kidnapped. 6 men with handguns drawn got out of these cars and surrounded me. And Theresa, despite being a good Catholic girl with very little actual world experience, immediately just starts popping an attitude with these guys. Isn't this overdoing it? I asked. You got 6 dudes with guns on you and you're just popping an attitude on them. It's like, bravo, that is awesome. It's not realistic and it does not fit the character. It is funny though. So they grab her and they put her in their car where okay, and this gets really stupid really fast. So you're gonna have to follow along. They grab her and they throw her into a helicopter. And on the helicopter, she asks, "Where are you taking me?" "To an aircraft carrier," answered one of the men holding guns on me. "Am I coming back?" "No." So they're taking her off to kill her, and the book does explain what's going on. It explains it very badly. But Theresa handles this, despite, again, being a good Catholic girl with no world experience, handles this very realistically. But I didn't cry. I wasn't a phony movie actress using hysterics to milk all the drama she could out of every moment. I was a real person and didn't give a damn what these kidnappers thought.
Just kidding, my new catchphrase is, I don't give a fuck!
Just shake that ass, bitch, and let me see what you got.
She didn't give a damn, then why is she putting up a brave front? Like, you're about to be killed. In a frankly ridiculous way, but... The question then comes up, how are they gonna kill Theresa? And it's... They're not going to put a bullet in her head. They're not going to throw her out of the helicopter. It's so much dumber than that. How are you going to do it? You'll be put on a plane with an atom bomb. This is so special. What did they tell you about me? You're a danger to the security of the United States. How? They didn't say. No need to know. Contrary to popular belief, the more information you give your agents, your soldiers, your troops, your whatever, the better it is. That way, in the event of something going wrong, they already know what's at stake, what the risks are, how to handle things, how to counter particular changes in the operation. It's better to just tell them. This whole need to know basis is so overused and so misunderstood in basic Hollywood cliches that it throws a complete misunderstanding of the way these operations work. It's ridiculous. If your men don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it, they're not going to be as invested in the operation as they should be. When it comes down to, oh, should we guard this checkpoint? Oh, who cares? I don't know, we're just getting paid to. As opposed to, why should we guard this checkpoint? Because if we don't, someone could sneak a bomb in and kill all of our friends. But these men apparently just blindly follow orders and don't even question, we're gonna have you take this girl and put her in a plane and we're going to kill her with an atom bomb. And they don't even question it. Is she some sort of a security risk? What kind of a risk is so severe that you have to kill an individual with an atom bomb? How is this not at least raising eyebrows? If I received orders like that, I would at least ask, dude, what the fuck? Especially because she actually does have super strength. She has powers. She could probably take these guys out, like just punch their hearts out of their chests or something. Instead, no, Theresa decides to be a good girl and just sits there patiently, waiting to be killed. Look, consider SCP, or Control from Remedy Studios, which a game you should totally be playing, by the way. In SCP, you've got all these weird objects with all these weird powers and abilities, and if you mishandle them, you could die very terribly. So the more information you give those troops, the better they can protect themselves and contain the threat. That's not happening in this book. It also really doesn't fit because the soldiers or agents or whoever they are, we actually never find out what agency they work for. They're just government agents. They're extremely nonchalant about carrying Theresa off to her death. Like they are disobeying all basic security procedures. They don't even have handcuffs on her. Yeah, it wouldn't do anything because she's got super strength and could snap out of them, but they don't know that. Well, they might know that. I'm honestly not sure. Again, information's very scant. Theresa even looks back at her life and remarks that, well, she doesn't admit how remarkably boring it is, but that's how I read it. In retrospect, I had had a charmed life. Nothing had happened to me. No attacks by sex-crazed boys. No illnesses. No traffic accidents. No run-ins with the police. Nothing. If I were to write my autobiography now, I'd write 3 lines. I was born, I had a good time, I was vaporized by a bomb. So you're admitting that you're boring. They take 2 or 3 helicopters, they're just hopping around refueling every once in a while. And she's basically allowed to wander around like she's a tourist. I was allowed to use the restroom with a warning that armed guards had the building surrounded and I couldn't escape. It makes no sense. Oh, we also get this little line here. Apparently she doesn't like dogs because when she was younger, a dog barked at her. It didn't jump on her, it didn't bite her, it didn't knock her down, it just barked at her.
Do you see this, Norman? Do you see what your awful book has done? Your stupid writing makes puppies sad!
Oh, and once she saw a traffic accident.
Oh, what's to tell? I was at the orphanage till I was 18, then I got my job at a souvenir stand. Oh, and once I saw a blimp.
I knew that this was coming when I first read this book, and I'm still confused by it. They make 3 helicopter flights, and they eventually land in some random set of nondescript military buildings. That's how it's described here. They're just settling in for the night because they're going to take a different plane to get to the aircraft carrier the next day. So just, hey, just lay down and sleep it off for a little bit. Now, I'm going to have to hold off on explaining this until the end, but it is so much dumber than you think. There was a beverage dispensing cabinet at the end. Hopefully it had plastic bottles. I walked along and picked up 2 tuna sandwiches, a piece of chocolate cake, an 8-ounce carton of milk, and a cup of coffee. Finally, I arrived at the beverage dispenser. It was the size of a refrigerator and had a glass door you could open and grab a drink from a shelf. There were 20-ounce bottles of Coke in there. I grabbed 12 bottles and put them on my tray. How did you fit 12 bottles with everything else on a standard-sized cafeteria tray? That is so weird looking. The stupid actually hurts. I pulled up the plastic bag and returned to my tray to put 11 of the 12 Coke bottles in the bag. There is no reason. She does not explain a deep desire to just be readily supplied with Coca-Cola. She just grabs 12 bottles of Coke for no discernible reason. And she puts them in a bag for no discernible reason. And she carries it with her for no discernible reason. Now, the reason why she does this is because this turns out to be some sort of an escape plan that she kind of inadvertently stumbles into. Norman wrote himself into a corner and didn't know how to write himself out. So he set up the most bizarre escape plan. It's not even that effective. Honestly, it's not even a matter of narrative convenience or good timing. This is somehow a step down from a Deus Ex Machina. I would prefer a sudden last-minute realization to save her, honestly, because it would come off as so less stupid. This is such blatant setup, and there's no logical reason for any of it. She just sits around eating her food, holding onto her garbage bag of Coke. I am not rephrasing that. Her thoughts just go to Steve. I smiled as I recalled how awkward he looked when he walked into my dormitory room for the first time. That was literally 14 pages ago. She's even put into this large cafeteria with like minimal guard. You know they're going to try to kill you, and she does nothing to try to escape. This is not a cunning, dynamic protagonist. This is a limp flower who is being guided through the plot by the hand. This is not some intense woman of action ready to stand up for what's right. She's just going along and hoping she doesn't die. And when she's threatened with death, she doesn't do anything. Sorry, no one is acting realistically in this. And I remind you, this is an old adult fiction story. So it's meant to be taken seriously. It doesn't have the leeway you would grant a young adult story. You can't just write off something unrealistic as, oh, that's just character A's quirky behavior. It doesn't work like that. I am supposed to see these government agents as a legitimate threat, and you've got them giving her minimal guard over a ridiculously long travel time. We're not done yet, by the way. She's still on the ground. She goes through 3 helicopter rides, a jet ride to an aircraft carrier, and another jet ride to a second aircraft carrier. They even have one airman who gives her some thermal underwear, because when she's put on the plane, the jet loaded with the atom bomb, to kill her, in which she will die, Theresa is handed the thermal underwear and is told, you'll have this if you want it. It gets cold like you won't believe up there. You're going to kill her. Why are you bothering with this? What really draws this out is Theresa keeps trying to wax philosophically throughout this. It's thinking about human condition, all that, her relationship with Steve. Of course, eventually it gets back to God. And she provides the worst display of intelligent design that I've ever seen. Look, I'm not here to harp on religion or anything like that, but if you are going to believe in a god or a higher power or whatever, please have a better argument than people's intellects could not be material alone and could not be hardwired to understand any concept presented to it. The human mind held universal ideas beyond the reach of matter and evolution. The intellect could not be made of matter, nor could the human soul operate on its own. So intelligent design is a thing because intelligent thought cannot be manifested into the physical reality? Oh, it gets dumber though. It continues with this. But most of all, the unselfish, self-sacrificing goodness of my mother, father, and Steve was not something that could exist in animals. So your argument is that animals cannot be kind. Bitch, my cat comes up to check on me when I have a bad day at work. And I would totally bring her on screen right now if she weren't napping on the bed. Okay, a lot more. We get every detail as she hops between all these different carriers. She still has the garbage bag of Coke. Eventually, she does get to the second carrier, in which she will be loaded onto a jet armed with an atom bomb, which will be sent up to 63,000 feet in the air, where it will detonate, probably killing her. And how? They are taking forever to kill this chick. I just wanted to get this business done. She's as bored as I am. She gets out of the jet onto the second aircraft carrier, where a dozen officers are apparently watching them. The officers seemed shocked to see me. I guessed they had not been told the person being executed was an 18-year-old girl. It was lucky everyone else was below deck. I could have caused a mutiny. Accepting this incredibly stupid idea, this overkill, using an atom bomb to kill a single person. Accepting that. This statement is stupid because it goes back to the point I made earlier about keeping your troops up to speed with all the information, because now you wouldn't have moments where they were shocked of, oh my god, it's a girl! And you wouldn't apparently have to risk a mutiny. But it gets worse! The oldest looking officer said, they didn't tell me you were a girl. I was right. They hadn't known. The people about to kill her don't even know what she did. At this point, why is anyone following orders? These are terrible orders. Believe it or not, when you get to this position, you swear an oath to defend people. You don't just blindly follow orders and kill people with an atom bomb without some sort of a very good explanation. Not realistic. But wait, it gets worse! There were 3 female officers in this group. The captain probably thought the condemned man deserved a last look at females. That is so awful. That is remarkably disrespectful to your officers. First off, way to objectify your own officers. These are not just new hires who just boarded the ship. These are actual women of rank. Second, this is so openly sexist that I'm not even gonna touch it. I'm just gonna hand it to whatever remnants of Tumblr there still are and let them deal with it. But because no one was given orders, because no one was given an explanation for what's going on, one of the female officers steps out of line and pulls out a cell phone, an SCI violation so severe she should be court-martialed on the spot. Nobody had been given a protocol, so this young woman pulled a cell phone from her pants pocket and boldly walked around the government men until she was almost in front of me. She held up the cell phone and activated the video mode. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked. She is recording what is clearly supposed to be some sort of a highly classified operation. The fact that not only is she allowed to even start a video, but no one moves to stop her is shocking. I'm sure all the members of the military watching this are pulling their hair out at how brazen a disregard this is for all sense of protocol. I'm not even military, and I'm pissed off at it. This is basically a chance for Theresa to do something inspirational, you know, some brave final last words. It is so trite. I once read a famous quote by the Shawnee Indian chief Tecumseh, I am certain I got that wrong, about singing a death song and going out like a hero. I had rewritten it for more universal use, never dreaming that I'd use it for myself so soon. If people grieve your passing, rejoice in the good you did, and die like a hero going home. I feel good about who I was. That's all she has to say. She talks about rejoicing in the good she did, but we don't have any details on the good she did. She joined the baseball team. She got superpowers. She was on TV. She talked to a couple of people, and I am honestly struggling to think of anything more significant than that. Oh, she went to college and married her husband. There you go. Nothing significant. They get her into the jet. I climbed the ladder and awkwardly got into the cockpit, still carrying the garbage bag of Coke bottles. Why is anyone allowing this? I mean, I guess they're putting her in a thermal suit and hooking her up with oxygen, you know, so she doesn't get knocked out before they blow her up with an atom bomb. So everyone's shrugging and just saying fuck it to protocol. The garbage bag of Coke made it on 2 other jets up to this point. So what I'm confused by is who's piloting this jet, because I don't think anyone is suicidal enough to actually, because they're going to blow up the jet with the atom bomb. It's not going to escape the blast radius. And there's no apparent pilot. And why the hell would Theresa know how to fly it or even agree to? I'm assuming there's an autopilot program, but that's never confirmed. The jet just flies up like magic. But Theresa immediately starts her escape plan as soon as she's in the air. She rips off the seatbelt harness, and she immediately goes to work tearing open the Coke bottles. I grabbed the garbage bag of Coke bottles and put it in my lap. I uncapped a bottle, poured the contents on the floor, tore off a small piece of garbage bag, wrapped it over the opening of the empty bottle, and screwed the cap over the plastic-covered neck. That would make a watertight seal. The bottle went inside the jumpsuit under my left armpit. I did the same procedure with a second bottle, which went under my right armpit, and a third bottle went on my left side, a fourth bottle went on the right. She does this with all 11 bottles, which will apparently keep her body buoyant, when she rips open the canopy and jumps out into the ocean. I want to point something out. Her plan to get out of all this was to use a bunch of Coke bottles as flotation devices after jumping out of a jet. But she got all the Coke bottles before she was told she was going to be put in a jet and blown up that way. She bought 12 bottles of Coke for no other reason. She didn't know how they were going to kill her. She otherwise was dragging around all the bottles of Coke for no reason. This is such lazy story crafting. Norman had to artificially jam in a solution because he was not clever enough to think of a way to save his protagonist in any other way. You know, the one with superpowers. She could have rushed off, pushed her way through while she was on, at any time, really. Not just when she was on the carrier, and like jumped on a lifeboat and sailed off that way, and have that crap out, or maybe they fired a shell at her and it blew up the life craft, and she was left floating in the ocean because they can't find her. Okay, that's still a bit of a stretch, but it is far better than what we got here. Instead, she jumps out of the plane at, let me just double check, at about 54,000 feet. But she still has enough wherewithal to stretch her arms and legs out and adjust her angle so that she's kind of falling spread eagle. And as soon as the ocean comes up close, once again I covered my face with my arms. My body made a hard belly flop. I was knocked out. Theresa just did a 54,000 foot belly flop. Not gonna lie, that's kind of epic. She somehow figures out that she's in the South Atlantic, far below the equator. I'm not sure how she really figured that out, because it's not like they were giving her directions, but whatever. And she passed out. And that is the end of Empress Theresa. This is 4th chapter. I'm this far in, and I've been talking about all the mistakes and all the fuck-ups in this book, or however long this video has been going. This has been one of the most amazingly difficult trials I've ever had in any kind of a book. I am exhausted. My throat hurts from screaming. All the characters are garbage. Nothing they do makes sense. Everything exists purely to serve Theresa and make her look good. There is not a shred of realism, even within the concept of this being a sci-fi fantasy book. There is not a shred of realism anywhere there. The idea of there being alien goo god powers are okay. I can accept that. I cannot accept everything else. This is so dumb. This is so amazingly dumb. But you want to know what's bad? What's really bad? The section I've read to you so far is the best, most realistic part of it. It gets so much dumber. So much dumber. Wait for that. This is gonna be a multi-parter. I am not sitting through more of this. I need a break. So come back next time whenever I can work up the sanity to actually go through this book again. I'm going to go sit down. I'm exhausted.